I wanted to kick this off by asking you why you picked Tombstone.
How bad does a writer have to make a villain in their story to make you enjoy seeing them get what they deserve?
That's a good question. And there's a lot of great Westerns out there.
We might have some argument or debate.
I'm coming in with a hot take.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Watch Well podcast. And we today have taken over Dead Man Walking Studio.
Dead Man Walking, yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming, man.
Yeah.
When you guys said we're driving up, we're coming, I was like, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's hang out, have fun.
All right. So if you guys are new, my name is Parker. This is my co-host, Nick. And this is
Greg
our
Moore.
guest today. Greg, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Cool. Yeah, so Greg Moore, host of the Dead Man Walking podcast, married to Samantha, 18 years, 3 kids. Homeschool, Reformed Presbyterian, love the Lord, part of the Fight Laugh Feast Network, real estate broker, county commissioner, do a little government auctions on the side. What else you want? Yeah, I got a lot of things in the fire.
Yeah. Jack of all trades and master of all of them.
Yeah.
All of them.
I'd like to think so. My wife might say different.
Right. All right. So today we're going to be reviewing Tombstone. Actually, we wanted to kick this off by asking you why you picked Tombstone.
Okay, so one, it's the greatest Western ever made, and there's a lot of great Westerns out there.
We might have some argument or debate.
I'm coming in with a hot take right off the top, all right? That's what we do on this show, I heard.
That's awesome. That is true.
Not only that, but I love movies where there's underlying currents of worldviews and the characters are very well written. Mm-hmm. And if we get into it, I can show you in the first 5 minutes of the film how the writers and directors have already kind of set up the worldviews of all the main characters and reference back to that. And I just really, I think that's what people long for in movies too. There's a reason why the new Top Gun did so well when it's talking about male roles being defined, female roles being defined, hero, anti-hero. Some of the stuff that's coming out of Hollywood the last 15, 20 years is just absolute garbage. Yeah. And we just really want a good story to be told. We want to know who's good, who's evil, justice being served. And I think Tombstone does a good job of that.
Yeah.
So you just basically plugged our podcast. The entire purpose of what we do.
Hey, I'm glad I'm here then. I'm in the right place.
Yeah, when something is good, why are we drawn to it?
Okay,
what in us makes us drawn to this?
I just say too, and I think I told Parker this, Nick, I always know it's a great idea when I get jealous of it. And when I saw your podcast, I was like, why didn't I think of that? I could just be watching movies and talking about the worldview of the characters. So your guys, the Well Watched podcast, I mean, what a great idea. I don't know anyone else doing it, especially in the Christian space. Mm-hmm. So I just want to give kudos to you. Yeah. So for you, everyone listening right now, you're listening to something pretty cool. No one else is doing it.
We appreciate that. And I always forget our mission statement and purpose statement because we rewrote it last week. But I thought that it was a good idea to read that again.
Yeah.
And I can't find it.
He's got to find it.
I can't find it.
Yeah,
so it's something to the effect of we exist to help the movie watcher explore story and then come to the realization that without Christ, you can't understand story.
Oh, that's good.
Mm-hmm. And then the purpose is something to the effect of we exist to help build the church. They're apologetic so that they can explore story and come to those realizations.
Well, the cool thing is art belongs to God. It's there to glorify Him. Music, pottery, painting, movies, theater. It's all to glorify Him. And I feel like the church has just really given it up to the secular world in the last 50, 75 years. And General Simpson had a quote that said, does Satan own the 5th and the 7th and the cord? If so, I will go back down to hell and plunder it back, all for the glory of God. And it's like, that's why we have movies and stories and books. It's to glorify God. So you guys are doing something really cool where you're kind of catching this wave of the renaissance of art within the Christian community and going, well, hold on a minute. There's a reason that the whole reason someone can even make a movie is because they have to have a worldview. Amen. And 99.9% of the time, that worldview is based in Christian principles. It is. Good, evil, justice being served, right? Yep. So I think what you guys are doing is cool because it's not highlighted enough. We just take for granted a good movie, a good book. But it's like, no, that author has to have a worldview. That has to be based on something. Mm-hmm. And it's all based on Christ.
Amen. Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's first 3 chapters of Romans right there.
There you go.
So let's fight.
Let's fight. You want to get right into all of that?
Fight.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's fight.
All right. So you want me to start? You want Greg to start? How are we going to do this?
Maybe we should sandwich it. So maybe let our guest go first.
Okay.
And then
I'll
you
go in the middle.
and then you can
All right.
disagree.
You haven't-
and then I can be on
You
his
haven't explained
team.
this segment to me. Are we physically going outside and fighting?
We're going to box. Yeah.
What are we doing?
So
No, jujitsu.
You've already kind of, so you've already, when you said why you picked Tombstone, you've already kind of given your review. But if you could just, review the movie, not necessarily the spiritual components that we'll get to here in a second, but just what's your review of the film? What do you like about it? What do you think they did well? If there's any criticism, then what's that?
Yeah, so with Tombstone, I really like the fact, like I said in the beginning, that all the characters are kind of defined. You see right up front, what is it, Curly, I'm going to forget some of the names now, Curly Bill, or, the cowboy. You go to hell, or me first, you first, right? They shoot a priest right in the first 2 minutes of the movie. You're like, these are the bad guys. They have he's quoting Revelation 6:1. But at the same time going, hey, man, we're the hell that's coming after the man on the pale horse. So you go, wow, those guys are the evil guys. Then you see someone like Wyatt Earp, and the very first scene you see in him is, he smacks a guy with a whip that's whipping a horse. And hey, hurts, doesn't it? And you go, oh, this guy protects even the animals. This is very Levitical. This is very Deuteronomy, like protect your animals. Like, okay, this is the good guy. And then Doc Holliday is the best one, because when they introduce when they introduce that character, he starts off and he wins the poker hand, and then the guy gets mad and threatens and gonna threaten him with a gun, and he pulls the guns on him, but then puts him down and says, hey, we can still be friends. Let's just keep gambling. You go, this is a pretty honorable and upright man, right? A little bit, like he was merciful to this guy.
Then he stabs him.
then he stabs him, and then the best part of that whole scene, on the way out, he's already won his legitimate poker money. They just grab the money from the table on the casino. And go, well, heck, since we've already stabbed the guy and we're taking the poker money. So you go, okay, so there's a gray area here with Doc Holliday, right? So it's like, okay, characters defined. And then I just think the movie shot beautifully. There's some, and it's an older movie too. I think it stands up against the test of time with CGI and all that stuff. Yeah. But very well told story. I really like that the OK Corral isn't the ending, but the beginning of something. Every OK Corral movie you've seen, or Western, it's like the big standoffs at the end. The big standoffs in the first 20 minutes of the movie, and then that starts a whole, you know what I mean, escalator of things that happen. And I kind of like that when I watch a movie, to where it toys with the standard first, second, third scene. Right. And you go, oh, okay, so this is what kicks it off. But written well, characters developed well, probably a little long, but I don't mind longer movies. I don't know what the running time's like, over 2 hours, I think, almost 2.5 hours or something.
It didn't feel incredibly long to me.
No, some of those that are 2.5, 3 hours, you go, okay, when is this thing going to end? Like, let's resolve this.
My popcorn's gone.
Yeah.
Time to go.
Yeah. There was some love stuff in there with I'm like, okay, I don't really, I'm not a big romance on screen guy anyway, which is fine. There wasn't a lot, but a little bit that, didn't care for. But other than that, like I said, well written, well shot, good development of characters. I think that makes it a good Western. Yep. I mean, if you can have those three elements in just about any movie, it's at least entertaining. You can sit through it.
Yeah. So what you just said, that makes it a good Western. That's exactly my take. That it is a good Western, but not one of the best. Okay. So I enjoyed the movie. So I've also got to give a little bit of a confession here, I think. You said you wanted to do Tombstone, to talk about it on this episode. At that point, I had never seen Tombstone.
Are you serious?
So I don't know what that does to my credibility as a movie reviewer.
So that's why you're wrong on your opinion.
Yeah. So I see.
Sure.
If that reduces.
So it becomes the best the more you watch.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So maybe that's the case. Yeah. Maybe if I go back to it.
That's why Back to the Future's in the running for me. I've seen it 80 times.
So I did.
Right. That's right.
So I do think it's a good movie. I enjoyed it. I love the opening scene, like what you said. These are the bad guys. You establish them as the bad guys. You know they're evil. And there's no doubt about that from the outset of the movie. I completely agree with you there. And at points, as the movie progresses and the story, like the stakes raise in the story, I think that it becomes a beautifully shot movie. Yeah. But I kind of felt like, with the exception of the opening scene, when I was watching it, and I don't know if this is cinematography, I don't know if it's direction, maybe it's a little bit of acting, I'm not really sure. I felt like I was watching a stage play set in the West, and it was people in costumes rather than actually being in the West. Now, as the movie progressed, I think that completely flipped around. And as the stakes were getting higher and higher, I think the shooting of the movie began to match those stakes, and there's some beautiful, absolutely beautiful landscape shots later in the film. Like specifically after, I'm going to forget names too. I actually think I have it right in front of me.
So many characters in this movie too.
Virgil.
Yeah.
Right.
He gets shot and he's going back on the train, right? After that point,
Yeah.
I think the shooting of the film gets beautiful shots.
So that's where Kurt Russell stepped in as director. So the backstory of that film too is it went through 2 directors. They were behind shooting. After 30 days, they were 60 days behind. So they were basically doing half the work every day. They fired the director. They wanted to bring in someone else, and they said no. And then Kurt Russell said, "Well, I'll step in and start doing some of the shots." And they shot that one of the first shots of when he tells Ike or whatever, like, "Oh, hell's coming with me," and that was like the second shot of the movie.
From that moment
because they
on,
used the
I thought
same
it
train
was-
as them getting off. So I take into account when I say best Western too is the time, the budget, like. Yeah, 1990, whatever it was, 6 or 8 or 2 or
3. It was 93.
Oh my gosh, so early 90s. So look if I'm looking at like Westworld or something on HBO, it's much more incredibly shot, better cinematography.
That's true.
Right? So I kind of take that into account too, to where I would even put a John Wayne movie in the running or something and go, oh, look at those. Look at the background. It's just, it's something spinning in the back. He's on a wooden horse. Okay, that's what they had available to him. I'm more looking at like story, character development.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I would differ on you there, to where like maybe I'm not taking the cinematography in as much just because times change, the way you shoot change. But yeah, I agree with you. It does get better.
I actually didn't know that about Kurt Russell coming in.
Yeah, I didn't.
He
know
would
that
not
either.
be credited as a director. He did so much work. They said, we want you to be credited as a director. He said, nope, not going to do it. And then it was a rumor for like 20 years. And just a few years ago, he came out and said, I pretty much did 80% of the directing on that. Val Kilmer came out on a podcast and said it. And then he came, he's not lying. I did.
Yeah.
But he was just a very humble guy. Didn't want to be in that seat, but no one else would kind of step up.
Yeah.
So I find that interesting too. There's a little twist that, your main actor was also directing debut.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, came out okay.
I wanted to ask, so what could have been added to the beginning? So with the whole context of your opinion, what could have been added before that scene that would have made it feel more immersive?
Now I'm not really sure. And so like, this is where if I were more of an expert in cinematography or in the way things are shot, I could probably give a better answer. But all I can really say is that when I was watching the beginning, probably the first half of the movie, is I was very aware of the fact that I was watching people not wearing things that they would usually wear. And that maybe that's acting. Maybe it's some of the comfort level with costumes and things like that. I felt like it came through. Whereas, trying to think of another,
like
a movie
like 3:10 to Yuma.
Like 3:10 to Yuma, but I also saw that like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So like it could also, maybe it's, I'm watching it 30 years after.
Right.
So there's a lot of things that could play into that, and that might be affecting my perception there.
Just a quick comment on that. You're very perceptive, because there was an interview done with Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer together, and they said that the director, and they made the decision to go full 100% wool to be authentic on the costumes. And at one point they were shooting in Arizona. It was 134 degrees inside. And he said everyone hated their costumes. They were just constantly sweating, very uncomfortable in them. But they made the decision they wanted them to look authentic. And he goes, if I were to do it again, we would switch it. The whatever look we got, it came out in the irritation of the acting. So that might be something you're seeing too.
Yeah.
You didn't even know that. And you're saying, so that's very perceptive idea. Because they hated whatever they were wearing. It's 125 degrees in your wool in the summer.
Yeah, it was kind of like, somebody was backstage and put on a costume that they've only worn twice.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way it came off to me. And again, that all changes as the movie progresses. I don't know if they changed costumes or whatever as it went on, but so I would say the best part of the film for me is Val Kilmer. I think he is
okay. So now we're all on the same
incredible. Yeah. So
well, I was going to say I'll concede to you if it's not the best Western ever made, but you have to concede to me it's probably the most quoted. You've probably heard more quotes from Tombstone, and you don't even know it.
Question.
You know what I mean? I'll be your Daisy. I'll be your Huckleberry. All
Hell's
these
coming with
Hell's
me.
coming with me. The whole thing, and you go, oh my gosh, people have been quoting this movie like crazy. So we can all agree it's probably the most quoted.
Yeah, it's definitely the most.
You're gonna
quotable.
do something or just stand there and bleed.
Yeah.
Pull that smoke wagon. Get to work.
Yep.
I mean, that's just a great scene if you're a guy, because even
it's manly.
I think you've had that fantasy. Like,
you do.
Step to me.
Up,
I'm protecting something. Let's go. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And Billy Bob Thornton does such a.
He did a good job.
Yeah,
It's Billy Bob.
yeah.
It's Billy Bob Thornton.
Little chubby Billy Bob Thornton.
Yeah, completely different than what I'm used to seeing.
Did a good job in that little bit role.
That's so good. That's so good. Okay, that was a lot of fun. What do we do next? Because
you got to give your
review.
review.
My review. I love it. I just get lost in the movie. I mean, that's really all I have to say. Yeah, I just get lost in it. It's so awesome. Every time I watch it, I look at my wife and be like, I could totally live in that time.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
It's like,
I mean,
I
they
just see
definitely
the true
romanticize
freedom.
it. Yeah.
And they do romanticize it. And I don't know how accurate the Wild West is with how wild it was in terms of people just shooting people. And I don't know the history and all of that, and how accurate it was versus, romanticized the cowboy gang and how easy it was to get away with stuff. But the freedom is what I enjoy.
Yeah,
because like I was talking to my wife and I was like, you can't have true freedom without decentralized responsibility.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So like the more centralized safety gets and laws and government overreach and all of this stuff, I'm talking in generalized terms, but the more freedom you have, the more of your own responsibility you have to take, and the more dangerous it gets.
100%.
So that when I watch Westerns and I go back to the Old West, there's something that just grabs me, and it's like, man, I just wish that we still had some of that.
Yeah. Well, like you said, it's a lot of personal responsibility, and the Lord gives us sharp objects to play with all the time. Mm-hmm. And that's one of them. Freedom is a sharp object. It can be abused.
Absolutely.
But it also needs to be taken care of. Because
it can be worshipped.
It can be worshipped.
It's an idol.
An idol.
Yeah, absolutely. So
the funny thing is, you said you don't know the history. There was a part in that movie too where I think I keep forgetting his name. Curly Bill
Brocious.
Thank you. Curly Bill. He's out there with his guns, drunk or whatever, howling at the moon.
Right.
And the sheriff goes out and says, I better go out.
Yeah.
And he shoots him.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see him cut to a scene, and it's like they're assuming it's 2 weeks later. He goes, the judge said, were you there when you shot him? No, well, we can't have a murder without a witness. And so that whole situation was actually not how it happened. What actually happened was he got shot. He lived for another 2 weeks. The judge came to the sheriff, and he was kind of scared of the outlaw. He said, it was just an accident. Don't let him, don't prosecute him. And that's why they let him off. So there's some stuff where you watch that and they romanticize it and you go, but is that historically accurate? No. There's some stuff there where they're changing it for the movies. But I mean, all the stuff I read during that probably 1820 to 1860 period, where it really was truly the Wild West, where your biggest cities maybe had 100 people, unless it was a mining camp.
Right.
It was pretty nuts. So there's no law.
Right.
I always tell, liberals who tell me, we're just good people. We want to help. I say, well, no, we're all depraved. If you removed all laws from this country tomorrow, what would the crime rate be in 5 years?
It'd be awful. Yeah.
I'm talking every part of crime, every person. If there's not, the law is what keeps us in line because of the consequences. It's not righteousness itself, but it restrains wickedness in a way.
Yeah, right.
So it's like,
and it teaches the law. It's the teacher.
Yeah.
Right. So
I think you had a lot of that going on out west, I think too. You kind of had your own law, right?
Yeah.
They called it cowboy law.
Yeah.
Cowboy justice.
Well, yeah, and it was also, kind of and I'm sure we'll get into this as we go through more of the theological takeaways. But what's written on the human heart, there seems to be a battle between God writing something on our hearts, so we have this intrinsic conscience of what's right and wrong, right? Mm-hmm. And then we also are battling that with the depraved nature of the wicked heart,
sure,
and how we just like our sin. So we're trying to battle that, and that seems to be a very fine line to govern in a Western setting, out in the plains or in the mountains where there is no actual government authority.
Yeah.
Decreed by God. You know what I'm saying?
But that's why I think this film does that so well, that theological point. So we're image bearers of God, which mean as image bearers of God, we have things like a sense of justice and wanting to see justice served. Even the most evilest of, we see this in prison, right? What do they do to child rapists?
Oh, yeah.
There's a bunch of murderers and thieves and thugs, and they go, but we're not that.
Yeah.
Right. We got to serve justice. We'll kill them. Right. So there's a sense of justice even when it's clothed in sin, nature, and depravity.
Right.
And I think they did that with Kurt Russell in this movie pretty well, because here's a guy who goes, I just want to make some money, sit back. Why did you become a sheriff? We weren't going to do this. But then what happens? His sense of justice, it starts with Virgil, seeing the kid, saving him. We need to protect. But then even with White Earp's character, seeing that, and he goes, okay, yeah, you might as well deputize me because Justice needs to be served.
Right.
So it was like, even though he comes out there for pretty immoral reasons. I want to, let's take over a gambling joint. Let's make some money.
Yeah.
But then
I already have a guilty conscience. Why can't I have the money?
Why
too?
can't I have the good stuff that comes with it? Good stuff, air quotes, that comes with it. But then seeing a sense of justice take over, I think it's a really cool dichotomy that you don't see in Hollywood movies that much anymore. I compare Tombstone kind of to the TV version of Breaking Bad. Probably the best TV show that's been made in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Maybe more than that. But the reason why Breaking Bad was so good was this, and we won't get on that because I know we're on Tombstone.
We bring up other movies all the time.
I know, okay.
You're fine.
It's because of those justice overtones.
Right.
You know what I mean? You watch Breaking Bad, and at the end of it, he goes, oh no, he finally admits it. I was prideful. I did it all for me. I like the way it felt. And you're like, you never see that kind of stuff in Hollywood movies or TV shows anymore. For them to become humble and go, I was prideful and this is the reason I really did it, or have a sense of justice. These are these like transcendent characteristics and principles that are in the Bible that are godly, that when we watch that movie, we go, oh, we identify that as an image bearer of God. You don't even have to believe her.
Right.
And you're rooting for justice. And you're like, why am I rooting?
Well, yeah, and that's true as well, because in like an atheistic worldview or a worldview absent of God, or however you fall on that spectrum, there's no reason to have an appeal.
No.
For those things, for love,
There
justice.
are no good guys.
There's no reason.
Or bad guys.
Yeah.
In atheism.
Yeah, we're just fizzing.
Yeah.
Was it Richard Dawkins who recently had an
Blind
interview
Pitiless,
where he came out and said he's kind of grieving over the fact that Christian culture is disappearing because of that, because he still doesn't believe in Christianity, but he recognizes that where Christianity is the majority, there's morality and there's reason for morality, but as it fades and as it drifts away, the morality in society makes a worse society for people. Right. So you can't thrive. You don't have, there's more crime, all of those things that take place as morality decreases in society.
I never thought in my lifetime I'd see an atheist come out and make an argument for presuppositional apologetics. I mean, that's really what he's doing.
Yeah,
like,
exactly
I don't believe in God, but for some reason, being moral is better. These moral laws seem to work. And it's like, well, what do you think we've been debating you about for the last 35 years, dude?
Yeah.
Well, you want to use that as a jump off into your first point? Well, first, we kind of jumped in there.
Yeah, I want to get, so that was another thing that I thought the movie did really well, was you talked about how you like the freedom of the West. And is it really true that, people can just go shoot up and there's gambling and all? Is that really an accurate depiction of the West? I don't know if it matters if it's an accurate depiction of the West, because the portrayal within the story did a great job of displaying the unrestrained man.
That's true.
Like this is, like you see, and I think this is more like it's humanity across the board, but I do think it is more prevalent in men to have that, like, I'm going to destroy something. Like when you're unrestrained, I'm going to go break, like Ronan, right? He runs everywhere. He'll run right through somebody if you don't tell him not to, right?
Yeah. So he's got this. Ronan's my firstborn, my son, and he's 4.
Okay.
And his favorite thing his favorite thing to do right now is he's got this, I don't know, it's this like station thing. It's just like a rod, and it's got a red bottom, and it holds like brooms and mops, and it, like
my kids had one of those.
Right.
Yeah, like
his favorite thing to do is to pick that up, which if you just have that and you swing it hard enough, I mean, it's a weapon. Yeah. And he likes to walk around and just casually like hit the 1-year-old with it. That's his favorite thing to do. And I don't see, and I know my niece is younger, but I just don't picture a young girl doing that.
Not often.
Walking around hitting people with trucks and
right.
To your point. So finish. Sorry.
Absolutely. And that's a really good example of what I'm talking about, is men when they're unrestrained, when they don't have something, whether it's, biblical morality, I'm tied to Christ and I want to obey and honor Christ, or whether it's, society at large has laws and I don't want the punishment. I don't want I don't want to reap the benefit or the negative consequences of these actions. So I'm not going to do that. When man is just completely unrestrained and left to his own devices, the depravity comes out.
Sure.
The depravity, the desire to see things destroyed, the greed of just having money. Like even when you get back to the reasons why Wyatt Earp and the group comes into Tombstone, right? They're looking to make money. Like, this is an easy place to make money. And he goes into this bar, and, you have that moment where it is kind of a moment of justice, but it's also kind of a selfish justice because he was already there looking for a way in to make money, right? To get
self-serving justice.
Self-serving, yeah. So he does give, I mean, the Billy Bob Thornton gets what he deserves, obviously, but it was a man looking out for himself that eventually that brought that about. But
so is that so are we saying that justice can only be truly served if it's not self-seeking? Is that the undertone of what you're saying?
I would say perfect.
So if Kurt Russell's character Wyatt Earp goes into that bar, sees Billy Bob Thornton, causing havoc or, being a disruption, and goes in, handles it without taking any money, is that the only way? Or is it okay in some scenarios to be paid for?
Well, I think that the evildoer can still get something that they deserve, even if the person delivering it was not pure in their motives.
Right.
So there's that sense. So
because there seemed to be a relationship between the bartender and Wyatt.
I don't think there was a previous, because he comes in and introduces himself and says, "Are you the owner?"
No, I didn't mean previous. I just meant like good faith. Like, hey, could you handle that? And then I'll give you a cut of the house. So I guess what I'm teasing is it okay to be compensated? Like, is compensation inherently immoral in that specific scenario?
No, I don't know that. I'm not talking about specifically like because he was paid or because he earned, but that he went in looking for that.
Okay. Fair
and
enough.
He found a way to do it,
Fair
and
enough.
it was in kicking this guy out.
Right.
Because he was
Makes sense.
wild, and he wasn't.
Enough.
He was hurting.
I think the Kurt Russell character saw the angle after the county sheriff goes, "Oh yeah, it's a great place, but it doesn't do well. Everyone, no high rollers in there." And he goes, "Well, we came here to make money." And then he goes in there, sees the idiot yelling at the dealer yelling, and he goes, "Okay, this is how I capitalize." Obviously, if this bartender is going to let this guy run his joint,
right,
and he's nobody, because I can just tell by the way he's running his mouth, because people who talk loud don't have a lot to say, right. I think that's what, and not to neither one of your points, but I think that's what I think they're trying to put there. Like he was quick on, and that was historically Wyatt Earp, because he hung out with some guys in Hollywood and stuff before he died in 1928, and kind of rewrote his story. Like kind of like was going to directors and like, oh, well this, and really positioned himself as this kind of like, John Wayne has actually said he based it off of his story of who he was, to where if you actually talk to the people that knew him, Wyatt Earp was a pretty rotten guy.
Yeah.
I mean, they referred to him as a pimp, a scandler, a bad gambler, and not that great of a shot, because he'd never been shot at or never been hit by a bullet. So it's like this weird thing where he's our hero in the story, but in real life, he's kind of a scoundrel. Yeah. But to your
it's more of a facade for sure.
He kind of crafted that in Hollywood, because then the 3 movies that came out about him in the 40s and 50s were from the 2 directors that he was best friends with after his death. And they kind of did a post-mortem rewrite of who he was as a person.
Interesting.
But I would agree kind of with both of you and say God can serve justice any way he sees fit.
Right.
And if that, when we're talking about Joseph, it doesn't say, what you meant for evil, God used for good. He said, no, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. That's a very clear distinction.
Yeah. Right.
So in our minds, in our depraved hearts, we're doing these evil acts, and God's saying, no, you're actually doing a good act for how justice is going to be served and how my will is going to, sovereign will be played out. So I look at it and I go, hey, maybe Wyatt Earp gets justice served on him for the way he took over that,
Yep, that's right. That's right.
I don't know.
That's a good point for sure.
Yeah. Yep. God can use evil men to deliver his perfect justice.
I think he does in the Bible too, quite often if you read it. Yeah.
Yep, that's awesome.
So along with that, you kind of see the and this might be redundant because we already talked about unrestrained man and all of that, but you see the contrast between law and chaos, right? You see where there is no law, where there is no standard, chaos ensues. And that's kind of the whole conflict. Virgil wouldn't have been shot. A lot of the conflict of the film would not happen if there was law previously established, right?
Yeah.
So that chaos that's there is about law. I mean, or absence of law, maybe the better way to say it. And then Virgil is the first one his internal sense of justice takes over and saying, this chaotic town is not good for anybody. And the things that are happening here, somebody needs to be a representative of justice and law and order in this city, and it's going to be me. I can't not do it. Yeah. So it's like that. I'm like somebody who has that heroic sense of justice can't just be like, no, I'm just going to let this play out, which is what Wyatt wanted to do, right? In the film, he wanted to be the one to just, I don't want to get involved.
Right.
But Virgil's the one who jumps in and says, no, this can't be. There needs to be justice here, because where there is no law, there's chaos.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too in the movie how they kind of set up like Wyatt's the kind of ringleader of the brothers. But really, if you look at the movie, Virgil, he looks up to his older brother, and he's kind of the guy who guides him. Not only does he become a sheriff first, say we need to put down law, but even when he's shot, Wyatt Earp looks at him and goes, well, what should I do? What do you want me to do? So there's a thing of two to where, is Wyatt really the one making the decisions here? And did Virgil know all along, like, we'll follow you, Wyatt, but eventually you're going to come back around because kind of once a lawman, always a lawman, or there's some type of saying in there in the movie that says that. And I go, yeah, that's interesting too, how you look at that relationship between the three brothers and you go, which one really is kind of pulling the strings and making the decisions? Which I like. We don't know. It's kind of unanswered. Mm-hmm. The director or the writer kind of gives you both options. That's what I like about a movie too, that makes you think and go, yeah, they thought about it, but they didn't answer the question for you. So you can kind of come to your own conclusions.
Yeah. Yeah. I was watching, I think yesterday or the day before, I was watching National Treasure. Yeah. And there's a scene, and I'm going to forget the quote, but there's a scene where essentially Nicolas Cage is trying to decide what to do. So he went to the FBI, he went to the Department of Homeland Security, and he's trying to alert everybody that the Declaration of Independence is going to be stolen. And then he quotes the Declaration of Independence standing in front of it. And essentially he's saying, he says it as it's written on the document, and he says, nobody talks like that anymore. And then I think his buddy Riley says, what does it mean? He says, those with this responsibility, or those who are able to do something, have the responsibility to do it in terms of saving something or doing the right thing.
Sure.
And then in that moment, he decides to steal it himself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the dichotomy between Virgil and Wyatt Earp in this scenario, where Virgil's to the point to where I can do something, I should. Or right. I ought. It's a moral ought at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Wyatt is still in his own pride saying, I don't want to do what I used to do anymore. I don't want to use my skills to help these people. I want to continue to be prideful, make my money, and be left alone.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm wondering, too, if it's a little bit of that, and also maybe he knows what it's going to unleash as well, too. Because it's like maybe that's movie effect, the way they wrote it, but I mean, it's like a switch is flipped. I mean, once at that point, now I'm no longer restrained. I've got a badge, and I'm going to kill every one of you that's wearing a red sash.
They did kind of show it like a crusade.
Yeah.
He just went
to where it was almost lawless,
right,
the way they kind of did
like
it.
Vigilante,
went,
right.
That's an interesting choice. Not like you went through, arrested him, put him on trial. Right. I'm going to start executing people, right?
Right. Yep.
But even then, when you're watching that, you go, these are evil guys, and there's a sense of justice there. And you go, where's that coming from? Why do I feel so good to see evil men meet their maker? You know what I mean? Like you almost sometimes feel a little guilty about that, because you're like, look, if I was ever in a position, I would want to be shown mercy. Mm-hmm. That's the way I wake up every morning, right? Like, the Lord showed me so much mercy. I'm so grateful every single day. Like, how can I not show mercy and gratefulness to other people? Try to give them a long leash, so to speak, in their sin or the response or the relationships to me, because I've been forgiven so much, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you go, it's such a great scene. You're like, yep, they're getting what they're due.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like, right. Where does that sense of like, yeah, you're going to die for the right. horrible things that you've done to people.
Well, and I think that it's also, you have to, and this is probably oversimplifying it, but there's love your neighbor, and then there's love your enemies.
Yeah.
And love your neighbor is more broad than love your enemies. You know, love your enemies are the people that are working against you, right? Obviously. But the love your neighbor are the people that your enemies may be committing atrocities against.
Sure.
And you can't continue allowing that, because so the question is, when does allowing your enemy to continue committing atrocities become hateful to your neighbor?
Yeah.
And that's a really fine line.
Mm-hmm.
When do we as Christians take up arms, or not even just physical violence. I mean, it could include that, somebody breaks down your door and you want to defend your home and all of these things, right? But intellectually, or even out on the streets with, combating worldview, kind of like what we do with this podcast.
Yeah.
When do you love your neighbor who is not your enemy more than loving your enemy? When does loving your enemy become hateful towards your neighbor because you're letting them either separate them further from God or physical harm or those types of things? So if you guys have anything to say about that, I'm just curious. I know it's probably pretty big to talk about, and we could probably do a whole podcast on
that's a great example. Let's say you physically have a neighbor and she's being physically abused by the husband or boyfriend, and in kind of that relationship to where she won't call the police, or kind of Stockholm syndrome type thing's been going on for a while. You, as someone who knows both of them, when do you step over the line and go, okay, my neighbor versus the enemy of her? I mean, that's not a great example, but it's kind of like, I know what you're saying.
It fits. I think it fits. When do you go in and
say,
get the authorities involved?
Right.
When do you, if something happens before then, when do you use physical force? Like that's tough.
And then in current society, so let's using that example, the spousal abuse example, there's a point at which, in order to love your neighbor in that situation, it might involve them not feeling loved by you, right?
Correct.
Because the abused spouse is telling you, don't intervene, don't do anything about it, just let me be. But in order to actually love them objectively, in the truest sense of the word, you have to step in.
Right. It's almost like a parental.
So it's like love isn't, obviously in our current society, love is, I get to tell you whether you're loving me based on how you make me feel.
Right.
And so that's just a distorted view of love, because sometimes in order to love somebody, you have to step in and risk them believing you're the bad guy.
Right.
In order to step in and protect them and love them well. So, that's another potential conflict in there, is that you can step in and do what is loving to your neighbor, yet no one ever sees it that way. No one ever sees you as acting in that way, and you have to be willing to take whatever pushback comes from that.
I think too, like in James too, when he's working through like what is a dead faith, a live faith, an active faith. Here's works based on faith, and then he goes to James 4 where it says, "And if you know what to do is good and don't do good, then count it evil unto yourself."
Right.
So God has a standard of, if there is something good that you should be doing and you're not doing it, then being, not doing it is counted as evil.
Well, and
that's
even
a pretty high standard.
And even 1 Corinthians 13, I remember the reference. Now I'm going to blank on the verse.
You can paraphrase it.
Love does not rejoice in evil.
Right.
So if you don't rejoice in evil, in other places, abhor what is evil, cling to what is good.
Yeah.
Like the closer we get to Christ, the more we're going to hate what Christ hates.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to have no choice but to intervene in certain situations, regardless of what it costs you.
Yeah.
And loving your enemy too, in terms of like self-defense, I've thought about this a little bit as well. I'd like to hear what you guys think too, but like in America, we're allowed to carry guns and we're allowed to train. We've got these rights that our government at least used to honor because they're given by God.
Yeah.
Now they're trying to take all that away. They're
Yeah.
supposed to protect that, but I think it starts with training, and too often a lot of guys with self-defense and stuff, they think and they have this self-deceptive thought process that they know what they're doing, and then they're not ready when something happens.
Okay.
Part of loving your enemy is being trained and having that continuous attitude towards improving your skills with a firearm or martial arts discipline, so that when those opportunities arise, you can be ready to either save their life in the process, whether it be de-escalation or choosing a specific discipline that renders them neutral without killing them. Because ultimately, as Christians, we know that if we end a threat, and even if we're justified in doing that, we might also, if we kill them and end their life, we may also be ending their chances of salvation.
Sure.
So I think that the loving your enemy starts with a self-defense mindset in those scenarios as well.
Well, I think too, really not to get too far off on this, but I just had Steve Cruz from the Regular Man podcast on. We just recorded last week and we talked about this, and I told him, I used the word de-escalate probably 5 times, and he was like, I'm so glad to hear you say that. Like, he's a police officer and was in the Army and all this. And I went, the best gunfight is the one that never happens.
Right. Yeah.
So what if loving your enemies just isn't, because we like to focus on the self-defense side because it pleases the flesh a little bit. Like, I'm tough, I can protect it, right? Without having to be really godly, you can just say, I'm being just. Right. So it's kind of an excuse. In fact,
that's true.
It's like, well, how good are you de-escalating a situation when an enemy approaches? How good are you at serving your enemy? And maybe that de-escalates or protects. We don't want to go to that. And I'm speaking for myself as a concealed carry for 15 years. I put a couple thousand rounds through my weapon every year. Right, there's the gun safe. We can go shooting later, boys, if you want. It's right down the road.
Sign me up.
But my point is, sometimes I even get on that a little bit too much. Like, oh yeah, I got a gun, I use it, I'm proficient. But it's like, yeah, but loving your enemies and protecting your family and protecting yourself, that can be done in living out the gospel to the enemy. That can change an attitude. How do you de-escalate? Yeah. So I've kind of been focused on that over the last more like 5 or 6 years too. Because you don't ever want to take a life of someone or have to be in that situation. I mean, there's a lot of legal ramifications that come with that, even if you're in the right as well. And it's last resort, right? But I've also noticed, like, if you're actively loving your enemy, loving your neighbor, preaching the gospel, living out the gospel in your actions and thoughts, most of the enemies don't really want anything to do with you anyway.
Right. Yeah, just preach the gospel to them and they'll walk away.
Guy's a weirdo. He says he knows Jesus.
Yeah. Well, what is it? The Art of War, I think, that says something along the lines of the best wars are the ones won without a shot fired.
Yeah.
I think it's something like that. I mean, if you know in the comments, let me know. Sort of rake me over the coals in the comments section about butchering.
No, but that's right.
I think it's from the Art of War.
It was the was it walk softly but carry a big stick? Who was that? Roosevelt,
I
right?
think. Yeah.
So it's that same thing.
Right.
Which, not to get too political, but that's kind of what we saw with Trump for 4 years, and people were amazed. They were like, we thought he was going to be this crazy psycho, but if you really watched how he was diplomatic, he was, when he sends a picture of the guy's house, of where he's staying, of the leader of ISIS, and goes, don't do anything because you won't be on Earth anymore.
Yeah, because that would convince me.
Yeah, right? And he did, and they backed down. He went, so there is a time for where even like real threats, not just facetious, like just throwing off, but a real, hey, this is going to be your consequence if you do this, and I have the military or the might or the know-how or whatever to do it. That can be a very effective way to de-escalate as well too, without ever firing a shot, like you were saying.
Yeah. Good stuff.
You said the best gunfight is one that doesn't happen unless it's in a movie.
Right. You don't want to watch a Western with no gunfights. Right. This movie stinks.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's funny, Nick.
So you talked about that, the enjoyment of watching somebody get what they deserve.
Yeah.
And so that actually makes me think of movies like Taken.
Yeah,
like with Liam Neeson, and then the John Wick series, like these movies where it's just like these revenge thrillers. But that kind of brings up another point. And do you think there's any redeeming quality whatsoever about Curly Bill?
Redeeming quality?
Yeah. Is there any? Can you think of any positive quality that the writers gave him in the film?
Well, I would say
he was the leader of the film too. Or not the film, the leader of the Cowboys as well too. I think he was a good leader.
Right. I was gonna say, you took the words right out of my mouth.
Oh, did I?
They followed him.
They followed him. So I mean, they had to. So I don't. But what I don't. So the only hesitation I have to say that is I don't know why they followed him. I don't think the movie touched on that.
Sure. No.
Because
it could be fear.
It could be fear. It could be that he actually helped them some way.
Well, you see one scene where Johnny Ringo is drunk, and then, hey, I'll be your Huckleberry.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Hucklebearer. I don't know. There's a big thing on the internet right now. Does he say Huckleberry or Hucklebearer, which is something totally different? Did you guys?
I didn't know.
So a huckle is the thing that's on the side of a coffin. It's the handle. So if you were a hucklebearer,
gotcha,
you were the guy carrying the guy's coffin.
Oh, okay.
So many people have said, no, if you listen to it, he's saying, I'll be your hucklebearer. Like, I'm going to shoot you, put you in the ground, and then I'll carry your coffin.
Right.
Val Kilmer came out, I don't know, a few years ago and was like, no, in the script it said Huckleberry. And the reason why is because it's like, I'm your man. And they also used to put Huckleberry flowers on the lapel during a funeral procession. So he says the script, but if you listen to it, you're like, that sounds like Huckleberry. But I think it's just his bad accent that he's doing. Val Kilmer's accent was the best. But
well, he was kind of hammered the entire movie too, right?
And sick, right?
He was hammered. Well, I thought the alcohol was because he was trying to cope with
he was
whatever.
Like
Did they say the sickness? I don't remember.
Tuberculosis.
Was it tuberculosis? That's
he
what
was
I
a
thought.
lunger.
Okay.
So there's a scene where Johnny Ringo is drunk, and remember he's kind of gonna challenge Doc Holliday, and Curly Bill comes up, no, not right now. And so he's protecting his guys, like, you're not going to win that fight. You're not in the right frame of mind. So maybe I like to imagine in my head, in his like lawlessness, he did a good job of running the Cowboys and protected his guys and looked out for him. Maybe that was something that was admirable, honor among thieves type thing.
Right.
But the movie, like you said, doesn't really say a lot about it. I would have liked a little bit. I guess there was a whole scene cut, 12-minute scene of them around a bonfire, the Cowboys around the bonfire after their guys get killed at the OK Corral, and they cut it for time and for budget. But it explored kind of the camaraderie of the Cowboys a little bit more.
I would have loved to see like a universe around Tombstone.
But I
just love it. I love it.
I was trying to connect that aspect of things. Is how bad does a writer have to make a villain in their story to make you enjoy seeing them get what they deserve?
That's a good question.
That's a very good question.
So, like, you look at, there's not really there's no redeeming qualities of the kidnappers in Taken. Like, you are just waiting for Liam Neeson to go do what he does and just destroy them. Just wipe them off the planet. And in Tombstone, you're waiting for that moment where Curly Bill dies. Like, you want to see that. You want to see him get what he deserves. Yeah. And I think part of the reason for that is because you have to portray the villain as almost irredeemable, no qualities whatsoever.
Right.
But I think what we forget is that's exactly what our standing is before God.
Yeah, that's
right. It's that irredeemable, nothing redeemable within us whatsoever.
If you violate one, you violate the whole thing.
We're the Curly Bill.
And when we see somebody like that, something cries out in us, justice.
Yeah,
right.
This guy didn't.
That's why I said I feel guilty when I'm like that sometimes.
That's right.
And if we apply that to ourselves, it's like, wow.
You're looking at a mirror.
You're looking in a mirror when you see that irredeemable villain who deserves justice.
That's good stuff, man.
And that allows a So.
I had someone I was talking to, and they were like, "Man, that poor fool in Proverbs, and the fool is always." I go, "But we're the fool,
right? Yeah.
Like when he says a fool does this, just insert your name. Greg does this." Like, that's literally how I read Proverbs once a day.
Yeah,
it's
that's
like
good
an
stuff.
insert, because it's like, we are the fool he's talking about. And that's why I said, I feel a little guilty sometimes. Like, get what he deserves. And the Lord's like, you should be grateful you didn't get what you deserve.
Absolutely.
That I saved you by my grace. Like, and you're like, okay. And I'm not saying don't serve justice just because we're saved. I'm just saying, you know what I mean? It makes you want to go, and there's people out there that need to hear the gospel.
It should, there should be a humility in serving justice.
Yes.
Well, you need to.
Yeah,
that's right. Yep.
Yeah. You still want people to get what's coming to them, but best case scenario is what's coming to them was paid for by Christ.
Yeah.
On the cross.
Right.
And
not to mean that there isn't any earthly consequences regardless, but still like through serving time, we'll say the gospel needs to be preached to those people, and they need to understand that, hey, even on the other side of this, there's hope.
Right. Yeah. So justice can be delivered in a sense of humility where like what you said, you wake up in the morning and you're thankful for the mercy that God has given you. You can still enact justice in light of that, in light of that truth, to know that you've received mercy when you do deserve justice and judgment from an almighty God.
Yeah, overall, just to kind of bookend it too, there's some stuff in that movie that I don't think you'd see in movies now. Just even like when the youngest brother, I can't remember his name. There's Virgil and, whatever the youngest brother is. Morgan. He's walking out and he goes, look at all those stars up there. And
I was going to bring that up.
Little God created someone like us, and he cares about it. You go, just now instead of that little 15-second clip, there'd be some like trans thing that would be put into the movie, or some gay thing or some and you're like, oh, it was nice to see a movie that just, you've got these guys out there and they're understanding there's something greater than me. A Romans 1:20 moment, like, we are without excuse. Look at this creation. Like, they have a little thing about spirituality and do you see a light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, I thought of Romans and then I thought of Abraham. Like, you're be as numerous as the stars, like your offspring will be as numerous as the stars. Like I wrote that down as well. But I guess my big thing, if we could take like a 60,000 foot view of just the movie, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but it was the dichotomy. One thing that I was left was the dichotomy between the unbelieving man or the natural man's confidence in justice and the Christian's confidence in justice. And I just kind of sat with that for a little bit. And it kind of comes back to just the objective nature of truth. So I wrote down, like, how does the natural man judge what's just? So if you look at Wyatt in that scene where he said, when Morgan says, like, just look at the stars, Wyatt, do you believe in God? And he says, well, I don't know. It's just very just superficial about it, like no depth of thought. If we're to look at Wyatt, like the movie portrays him as the standard of justice, he's the one that's going to go and he's going to enact justice. How does he know what's just? And how does he have confidence in the justice that he's delivering, as opposed to a Christian who follows Scripture that is eternally, objectively true, and we have confidence in that? That's the big kind of thought that I was left with was the, I guess, the difference in those two, because it kind of putting on the natural man's shoes, it was like, man, that's terrifying. Where you don't actually know what's true. And what I'm doing, I think, is justice. It's just a self-deceptive form of it, I guess.
Well, I would say a couple things real quick, because what Nick was saying earlier too, like we have to make make sure we know that justice might be being delivered, but it's being delivered in Wyatt Earp's case through revenge.
Right.
So it's an evil man that is ultimately, delivering godly justice. So we have to separate those two things, right? That's right. Because I think the whole movie is he's on a revenge streak. I mean, he's just like, you killed my brother. My brother other brother doesn't have an arm. Blah, you shot at our women. Like that's revenge. He's not going through the due process and all that. And then two, I would say that like the natural man outside of Christ still has, in a good Reformed Baptist would call it, the transcendent law written on their hearts, right? Of right and wrong, good and evil, right? Yeah. Stuff like that. Right. But are you saying, how can someone let's say outside of Christ have a sense of to serve justice?
What I'm saying is how do they know what's, so we believe, like Romans 1, right? Yeah. Romans 1, first 3 chapters of Romans, there's no one righteous, no one good.
Sure.
The man is without excuse, written on his heart. God put his law on our hearts. But it seems to me that the natural man can't discern what's written on his heart from his own motives, like Wyatt Earp. Okay. So how does he know what he's doing is, and even in Scripture it says the natural man can't discern because he doesn't see through a spiritual lens, right? Sure. So he can't know. Essentially, is like, I know I'm kind of paraphrasing that. It's foreign to him.
He has no foundation for it.
Right. So how can you? So like a natural man, so the unbeliever could stand next to a Christian and they could both say the same thing and be right. But what's the natural man's confidence? The Christian can look at Scripture and say, I know that this is true because this is the inerrant word of God.
In the United States today, the natural man still has the presupposition of godly principles and laws through the Mosaic Law, through the Constitution. He's still a theonomist at a little bit, not a full but still going. Well, we have laws. We have laws of murder and theft, and it goes. Well, where does that come from? Well, from the Magna Carta. Where does that come from? Well, it comes from Mosaic Law. Well, where did that come from? From the laws and precepts of Christ. Right. So we're in a weird position to where we think there's like this neutral place where there's God and there's good, there's evil, and then there's kind of this neutral place where we're just guys living in no, you're either serving Christ or serving Satan.
Yep, that's right.
And even all our laws in this country come from a biblical, not now, but I'm saying founding laws probably up to the first 40, 50 years were all very biblically based. Right. They were general equity laws. Right. Taken from the Mosaic Law. So I don't know, but that's I would say that the natural man has the law written on his heart, but like you said, the Bible says can't discern.
So I guess what I'm saying is to be really targeted is they could do things in accordance with what's written on their heart and it be from God, and they have that reference, right? We would all agree that. But how, like, it just, to me, it seems like it's very muddied, which is why the depraved heart goes as deep as it goes. And we see in the Wild West, the unrestrained heart, like we talked about earlier, goes that way is because justice gets very convoluted.
Yeah.
And and if you're worshiping yourself, you're not gonna, what's the old thing? There's two wolves inside of every man. There's a good one and a bad one. Which one wins? The one you feed.
Right.
So it's like, but you know, we're taught in Scripture that no one's righteous, no one's good. So we're continually feeding our own depraved nature and self-deception, and that's why the unrestrained, wicked heart goes that way.
Well, I think it's also,
even in spite of it being written on our hearts.
I mean, that's why it says God judges the heart, the motive behind the action, and then really, if you have motives to serve justice, you have to introspect and then judge your own motives against the precepts and laws of God to see if that's just.
Amen.
Because that action could not be just.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Amen. And I think that's
but the natural man doesn't do that.
Right.
At all.
Right. That's right. So that's kind of my point is, as a Christian, you can have confidence in justice and love and why America is so great because of how the laws, like you said, used to be.
Wait, why'd you point at me when you said that? Just because I brought up Trump one time?
No, because I was...
He's like, those MAGA guys.
No, I was just saying, you were talking about how the founding of our country came from, you could trace it all the way back to the Mosaic Law and the covenants. I'm just saying that that's the beauty of understanding Christ and knowing Christ is that you can actually have confidence in something that is unwavering.
Yeah.
As opposed to being confused with what's written on your heart and your own pride of what you think justice is.
Yeah.
And I think that's seen in Wyatt Earp. And bringing it back to the movie is he wants to do his own thing. He wants to do his own thing, but we would all still say that he has that written on his conscience, on his heart. And then he goes on a crusade to kill all the cowboys. And I think from the movie's perspective, talking about, I want to see Curly Bill or whatever his name is, we keep forgetting, get Curly what's coming to him. And even in that, it's still not just.
Not completely.
Because earlier in the film, when the sheriff dies, he says, no, we need to give him a trial. So that's just. Yeah. Trial, I would witnesses.
Say, but even believer or not believer, no man-made justice system is complete justice.
That's true. No, I would agree with
compared
that.
to God's justice. So we are all looking at a flawed justice, even within everything that we do through the legal system and all that.
No, I would agree.
Yeah. But it's also, too, you could have two different people watching this movie, one a believer, one not. One's watching something and they're relating it to godly justice, and the other one's like, this is a great revenge flick. Yeah, he went out and...
Yep.
Right.
And the depraved man says, get your revenge.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like...
But then that right there is a good point of why we do our podcast is so that we can witness to that.
Why are you in this?
Why are you in this?
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Took an hour, but I finally got what the podcast is about.
So if you're watching Tombstone with your buddies and they're in it for the revenge, ask them why, and use that as a stepping stone to get to the gospel, to get to Christ, to get to something confident.
Yeah. Why do we
long for that?
Why do we long for that? And that opens. That's a great way to witness just to another guy, because I'm going to tell you right now that Jesus is my boyfriend. Lay your head on his chest.
It's old.
Well, it's not only old, it's not accurate.
It's not.
Right? Jesus isn't some hippie standing at your door, crying, wanting to get in, soft, pacifist. No, he's the reigning and ruling king. But you talk to a guy and go, why is it that you, like John Wick, why was it so right? Why did it feel so right for him to kill so many guys just for taking the life of his dog, or whatever that is?
Yeah.
And you can really dig down deep, you guys do on your podcast, of like, well, I have a sense of this, like, if people do wrong, they should, have consequences.
And that
interesting.
Right there, Why?
And then you go great comfort on him. Have you ever lied, brother? Have you ever told him?
There you go.
Go great comfort. That's awesome.
There you go. That's the way to do it.
Cool. Well, thanks. I really appreciate it. I don't know how long we've been going, but...
we're about 58 minutes.
Oh, perfect. Cool. You have anything else? Wrap it up? You good?
Yeah, dude. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, no.
Like I said, you guys have a great premise for a podcast, and I was listening to some of the back episodes, and I was like... oh my gosh, these guys are just having fun. So
dude, it's a blast. I love movies.
Yeah. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for letting us borrow your studio. It's awesome.
No problem. Thanks for visiting.
Awesome, yeah.
Hey guys, it's Parker from the Watch Well podcast. If you liked this video, we want to go ahead and have you subscribe right here on this button. If you want to watch the full podcast episode, go ahead and click right here. And if you want to watch another Watch Well clip, go ahead and click right here. And remember, if you're going to watch well. We'll see you in the next one.